I didn't catch my wife cheating in some motel or on a phone screen. I heard it in my own house. The sun was bleeding out through the blinds, casting those golden stripes across the hallway floor. I set my briefcase down, loosened my tie, and then I froze. Elise's laugh drifted from the living room, low, sharp, the kind of laugh she hadn't used with me in years. And then his voice followed. Derek Vaughn, my best friend. Elise said it plain. Derek is everything Logan isn't. Bold, exciting. My husband's just ordinary. The words slid into my chest like a nail. I gripped the wall, waiting for the crack in my voice, the explosion people expect. But rage is noise, and noise is for men who need an audience. I don't. I walked out the door, silent. In the reflection of my windshield, I didn't see a broken husband. I saw a man about to build a case. Receipts, not rage. That was the moment my war began. Dallas in late afternoon has its own kind of silence. The heat softens, the cicadas fade, and the houses on my street lean into the shadows. When I stepped inside, the first thing that hit me wasn't her voice. It was the smell. Red wine, the expensive kind Elise never opened unless she wanted to impress someone. Light from the setting sun spilled across the hardwood in long golden stripes, cutting the hallway into pieces. My shoes tapped once, then I stopped, holding my breath as if the air itself might betray me. From the living room came the clink of crystal against crystal, followed by a laugh, hers. Rich, practiced, dripping with the kind of confidence that only shows up when she thinks no one's listening. I pressed my palm against the wall. The plaster felt cool, grounding. I didn't move forward. I didn't interrupt. I just let the scene sharpen inside me. Every detail, another line in the record I was already writing. Her words came clear through the doorway, wrapped around the rim of her glass like poison dressed as perfume. If it weren't for the paycheck, I'd have left him already. I knew that voice, every edge, every inflection, but I had never heard it sharpened like this. My name wasn't mentioned, but I didn't need it. She was talking about me, dissecting me as casually as if she were flipping through a magazine. The briefcase in my hand suddenly dragged at my arm, heavier than steel. 12 years of work, of loyalty, of quiet mornings and long nights, shrunk down to a paycheck in her eyes. I could hear Derek chuckle low, pleased with his role in her little confession. My jaw locked. My fingers tightened until the leather handle creaked. I didn't storm in. I didn't demand answers. Instead, I let the silence carve the scene into me, one brutal sentence at a time, and I promised myself I would remember every single word. I turned before the anger could turn me. The hallway stretched out like a lifeline, each step carrying me farther from the sound of her laugh. I slipped outside, the evening air pressing cool against my face. For a long minute I just stood by the car, letting the cicadas hum where her words couldn't reach. Then I pulled the small notebook from my briefcase. Not the one for work, the one I used when I needed clarity. On the first line I wrote the date, the time, the setting sun slicing across the floorboards. Then her words, every syllable burned into my skull. If it weren't for the paycheck, I'd have left him already. I underlined it once, hard, facts, not feelings. That was the rule. Rage fades, but ink lasts. By the time I closed the notebook, I wasn't a man trying to keep his marriage together. I was a man building a case. By the time I walked back in, the house smelled like seared steak and rosemary. Elise had set the table with linen napkins and porcelain she usually saved for company. She looked up, her smile automatic, the kind that hides behind candlelight. "You're home early," she said. "Traffic was kind tonight," I replied, my tone smooth, steady. I placed my briefcase by the counter, rolled up my sleeves, and washed my hands as if nothing in the world had shifted. We sat across from each other, clinking silverware against china, trading lines about neighbors and errands. To anyone else, it would have looked like a scene out of a glossy magazine, husband and wife winding down after a long day. But I wasn't eating dinner. I was documenting it. The wine she poured but barely touched. The way her phone lit up on the counter and how quickly she flipped it face down. Every detail went into the quiet file I was already keeping, one bite at a time. Halfway through the meal, her phone buzzed against the wood, sharp, insistent. Elise's hand darted quick, sliding the screen face down before the glow could spill across the table. Her smile didn't falter, but her eyes shifted, just slightly, like a curtain drawn too fast. I kept my fork steady, cutting the steak as though I hadn't noticed. Inside, every detail logged itself automatically. The vibration length, the way her pulse jumped in her throat, the faint lift at the corner of her mouth before she remembered I was watching. She asked me about work, voice light, casual. I gave her the answer she expected. Numbers, meetings, nothing to note. Meanwhile, my mind wrote its own minutes. Incoming message, immediate concealment, recipient unknown, time stamped. She thought I was blind to it, that my silence meant ignorance. But silence is space, and space leaves room for evidence. I let her keep the illusion, because illusions, when written down, become proof. That night, the house settled into its usual quiet, the hum of the air conditioner, the faint tick of the hallway clock. Elise slipped beneath the sheets, her back turned toward me, shoulders angled like a wall she didn't want to climb. I lay still, breathing evenly, eyes open to the darkness. She thought I was asleep. She thought my silence was the silence of ignorance. But in my head, I was writing. Timeline, 7:14 p.m. Wine poured, screen flipped. 7:18. Smile delayed, pulse visible. 7:22. Voice lifted when my fork scraped the plate. I built the record line by line, the way I would at work. Not feelings, not speculation. Facts only. Her breathing slowed, evened out, the rhythm of someone who believed they'd fooled their husband. I stayed awake long after, watching the ceiling fade from shadow to deeper shadow. When I finally closed my eyes, I wasn't the same man. I was an auditor of Betrayal, and Elise had just failed her first test. Morning light spilled through the blinds, washing the kitchen in soft gold. The smell of coffee filled the air before I even stepped in. Elise stood at the counter in her silk robe, phone pressed to her ear. When she saw me, she ended the call too quickly, lips curling into that practiced smile. She kissed my cheek lightly, almost rehearsed, then set a steaming cup in front of me. "Don't be late tonight," she said, sliding into her seat. "We've got dinner with Claire and Matt." Her tone was breezy, like we'd been nothing but solid all along. I stirred the coffee once, slow, watching the ripple fade. "I won't," I answered. Calm, predictable, exactly what she expected. But in my notebook, the line wrote itself. Morning. Phone call ended abruptly. Mention of social dinner. Potential alibi structure. She thought she was scripting my day. What she didn't know was that I was already scripting hers, and this story would not end the way she believed. I left the house with my briefcase like always, tie knotted, shoes polished, the image of a man heading to work. Elise watched from the doorway, sipping her coffee, satisfied with the illusion. I gave her a wave from the car, steady as stone. But I didn't drive downtown. Instead, I parked 2 blocks from the Dallas Public Library, a place where no one from the office would look for me. The morning light poured through the glass atrium as I spread out my notes across a quiet table. Later, I moved to a corner cafe, the kind with humming refrigerators and chipped mugs. There, I built the framework, a timeline, asset lists, copies of trust documents I'd kept tucked away. Every fact, every odd smile, every hidden message was fuel. To Elise, it would look like I was job hunting. In truth, I was case building. She thought my career ended with a pink slip. She had no idea my real work had just begun. That night, the table was set like a magazine spread, linen napkins folded just so, wine breathing in a crystal decanter, candles flickering soft against the walls. Elise moved through it all with ease, but my eyes weren't on the meal. They were on her. Every small gesture told a story. The way her smile flashed a half-second too late when I mentioned my day. The tap of her nails against the stem of her glass, faster when her phone buzzed across the counter. The way she leaned back in her chair, shoulders relaxed, until I asked a question she hadn't rehearsed. Then the tension crept in, tight around her jaw. I nodded where I was supposed to, laughed when the script called for it. But beneath the table, my hand pressed the pen into my notebook, tracing the scene in shorthand. She thought she was keeping secrets. But a body always betrays the mouth, and her body was shouting truths she never intended to say. The letter felt thin in my hand, just a single sheet of corporate indifference. Budget cuts, position eliminated, Words that had ended a dozen men's careers before mine. I laid it flat on the kitchen table that evening, the ink still smelling faintly of toner. Elise slid the page out of the envelope, eyes scanning line by line. Her lips parted halfway through, then curved into a laugh too quick, too brittle. These companies, no loyalty anymore. You gave them years. I studied her face, not her words, the flicker of relief behind her eyes, the way her fingers loosened around the page as if it was confirmation of something she'd been waiting for. "We'll be fine," I said evenly, my voice the picture of calm. "It won't take long to find something else." I noted her pulse against my knuckles when she reached for my hand, faster than her smile, faster than her lie. That night she roasted chicken the way I liked it, skin crisp, herbs tucked beneath, the smell of butter filling the house. 2 tall candles flickered at the center of the table, wine poured into gleaming glasses. If someone had walked in, they would have seen devotion, a wife caring for her husband in his moment of loss. But I was watching closer. She pushed food around her plate more than she ate. Her phone buzzed twice on the counter and she ignored it with a stiffness that gave her away. When I asked about her day, her answer came too smooth, polished like a line rehearsed. She reached across, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "We'll get through this." The words sounded soft, but her eyes betrayed her. They darted just a little too quick toward the phone, toward the exit from this performance. The chicken was perfect. The wine was rich. But the mask was cracking, and I was taking notes. It was a Monday morning when the mask slipped for good. Elise moved through the kitchen too fast, the slam of cabinet doors louder than it needed to be. My coffee cup hit the counter with a thud, almost spilling over the rim. She didn't look at me when she spoke. "You can't just sit around waiting for something to happen, Logan. You've lost your edge. You're too comfortable being nothing." The words landed sharper than the porcelain against wood. I folded the newspaper neatly, laid it on the table, and rose without a sound. I leaned in just enough to kiss her temple. Her body stiffened under the touch, a reflex she didn't bother to hide. Inside, I wrote it down. Direct insult, diminished respect, devaluation tied to employment status. I walked out the door like a man heading nowhere, but the truth was different. Every insult was evidence. Every word was another brick in the case I was building. Friday night stretched longer than usual. The clock on the mantel ticked past 10, then 11. I sat in the living room with a book open on my lap, but I wasn't reading. Every minute she was gone wrote itself onto the page of my mind. When the door finally opened, Elise stepped in with her heels dangling from her hand. Her perfume hit the air first, sweet, heavy, and not the kind she owned. I closed the book gently, marking my place with a finger. "You're up," she said too quickly, her eyes flicking over me as if surprised I was still awake. "I was reading," I answered, voice even, eyes steady. "Did you eat?" "Yes," she blurted, too fast again, setting her purse down with care she didn't use for me. She leaned in, kissed my cheek, and told me not to stay up late. I logged every detail: time, scent, words, lies. The record was growing thicker by the night. By the second week, the pattern became routine. Nights stretched long, the house echoing with absence until the key finally turned in the lock. Elise slipped inside close to midnight, shoes in her hand, hair falling loose around her face. The same unfamiliar perfume drifted ahead of her, rich and foreign, clinging to her clothes like a confession she hadn't spoken. I sat in the armchair, a lamp glowing soft at my shoulder, pretending to finish a chapter. She startled when she saw me. "You're still up," she said, voice pitched high like she needed the words to fill the silence. "I couldn't sleep," I answered calmly. "Did you eat?" "Yes," she replied, eyes sliding away, fingers tightening on the strap of her purse. She kissed my cheek lightly, almost mechanical, then disappeared upstairs. I stayed in the chair, notebook balanced on my knee, writing the truth she thought she'd hidden. Repeated late return. Same perfume. Same lie. Another night. Another excuse wrapped in perfume. I kept to the same chair by the window, a book in my hands, the lamp throwing a soft circle of light across the page. But I wasn't reading. I was waiting. The front door clicked past 11. Elise stepped inside, heels dangling, hair brushed back too carefully for someone who claimed she'd just been with friends. She froze for half a beat when she saw me sitting there. "You're still up," she said, voice thin, almost scolding. "I was reading," I answered, tapping the spine of the book. My tone was steady, unbothered. "Did you eat?" She nodded too quickly, slipped past me, and pressed a kiss to my cheek. The taste of wine lingered on her lips, not the kind we kept in our cabinet. I watched her climb the stairs, each step carrying her farther away. Then I closed the book and wrote the truth. Another late return. Same script. Same mask slipping. The next morning the house felt colder, though the thermostat hadn't moved. Sunlight spilled across the dining table in soft gold, but it couldn't warm the space between us. Elise sat with her phone in hand, thumb tracing the screen, her lips pressed into a thin line. I poured coffee, the steam curling upward, and took my seat across from her. "You're quiet today," I said lightly. She slipped the phone face down on the table and offered me a smile that never reached her eyes. "Just tired," she murmured. "I'm fine." But I could see it, the stiffness in her shoulders, the way her spoon clinked too hard against the mug, the shadow under her eyes that had nothing to do with lost sleep. I kissed her forehead before leaving, letting her believe I accepted the excuse. In my notebook, the line was simple. Morning deflection. I'm tired. Signs of strain increasing. Sometimes the shortest lies reveal the deepest cracks. The sun was sliding low when I turned onto our street. Headlights washed across the driveway, and that's when I saw them. 2 suitcases, standing upright by the front door like silent guards. Every zipper fastened, every tag in place. Not hers, mine. For a long moment I just sat there with the engine running, watching my own life packed into leather boxes. The air felt heavier, pressing against my chest as I stepped out. Gravel crunched under my shoes, each step slow, deliberate. The door opened before I reached it. Elise stood framed in the porch light, hair brushed to perfection, face set hard as stone. An envelope rested in her hand, held out like a weapon. "You're back," she said flatly, no trace of warmth. She thrust the papers toward me. I looked at the bags, then at her, then at the envelope. My voice stayed calm. "What is this?" Her answer came cold, practiced. "Divorce." She pressed the envelope into my hand, eyes gleaming with the kind of certainty only arrogance can give. "Sign the papers, Logan," she said, chin lifted high. "This house is mine now. You can't even hold a job. How could you hold on to me? Derek is everything you'll never be." Her words didn't cut like knives anymore. They landed dull, predictable, like insults rehearsed in front of a mirror. I unfolded the papers, scanning the lines. The petition claimed the home as marital property, her signature bold at the bottom. I took the pen she shoved toward me. My hand didn't shake. My chest didn't burn. One clean signature, nothing more. To her, it looked like surrender. To Derek, who lingered just inside the doorway with a smug grin, it looked like victory. To me, it was something else entirely. Exhibit A, I thought as the ink dried, filed under arrogance. I signed where she pointed, the ink sliding smooth across the paper. No pause, no hesitation, no grand speech to fill the silence. Elise waited for me to break, to argue, to beg, to fight for what she thought she had already taken. But I gave her nothing. When I handed the pen back, her smile flickered, just for a moment. Victory without resistance never tastes the way people expect. She wanted a scene, wanted proof she'd wounded me beyond repair. Instead, she got a husband too calm for the role she'd written. I bent, lifted the handle of the first suitcase and carried it to the trunk of my car. The latch clicked shut, sharp in the night air. I returned for the second one, her perfume drifting behind me like a trail of lies. To her, silence meant defeat. To me, silence was strategy. And tonight, I wasn't losing. I was documenting. I closed the trunk with both hands, slow and steady, the sound carrying across the porch where they stood entwined. Neither of them noticed the way I looked at the house one last time, not with grief, but with calculation. I slid into the driver's seat, the leather cool against my back. The engine purred to life, headlights cutting a white path across the driveway. Elise's laugh floated after me, brittle and high as if daring me to turn back. Derek's low chuckle followed, smug and hollow. I shifted into drive without a word. The porch shrank in my rearview mirror, their silhouettes pressed together like a cheap painting in bad light. Mile after mile of silence stretched ahead, No music, no radio, just the hum of the road and the steady beat of my pulse. They thought I was leaving empty, stripped of everything. But I wasn't running. I was returning to a place neither of them knew existed. I drove past the city lights until they bled into darkness, the road narrowing beneath tall oaks that seemed to lean closer with every mile. Then I turned onto the gated drive. The iron fence rose ahead, black and imposing, until the sensor caught my headlights. With a soft groan, the gate swung wide, smooth, deliberate, like a curtain parting for a show only I was meant to see. Beyond them stretched the long gravel lane, lamps lining the path in pools of golden light. At the end, Northlake stood waiting. Stone and glass, 3 stories high, windows glinting like quiet eyes in the night. My home. My father's legacy. The fortress Elise thought never existed. I eased the car to a stop, the tires crunching over gravel, the suitcases heavy in the trunk. Inside those walls was silence, but not emptiness. Inside was everything they believed they had stolen. The gate clicked shut behind me. Their game was over before it had begun. The suitcases landed just inside the door with a hollow thud, the sound echoing through marble and dark wood. I carried nothing else. No grief, no anger, only purpose. The study waited at the end of the hall, paneled in oak, my father's desk polished to a steady sheen. I poured 2 fingers of whiskey, let the amber catch the lamplight, then set the glass down untouched. I picked up the phone and dialed. Samuel Grant answered on the second ring, his voice sharp and awake despite the late hour. "It's begun," I told him. "She served me papers tonight." A pause. "And the claim?" "Attempted seizure of trust property," I said evenly, my eyes fixed on the fireplace that hadn't seen a flame in years. "File the suit first thing Monday." "Understood," he replied. I ended the call, curtains drawn tight against the night. Elise thought she'd taken my house. She hadn't even touched my foundation. Morning light poured through the tall windows, painting the study in amber. I stood behind my father's desk, jacket on, shoulders squared, when Samuel Grant arrived. He moved with precision, briefcase snapping open, thick folders sliding neatly across the polished wood. "The petition she filed is worthless," Samuel said, tapping the first page. "The Northlake estate belongs to the trust, always has. What she attempted is fraud by misrepresentation." I turned the pages slowly, my hands steady, my eyes colder with each line. The seal of the trust gleamed on every document, proof stronger than any insult Elise could hurl. Samuel slid a second file closer. "Damages will follow. We'll hit her where it hurts. Costs, penalties, exposure." I took the pen, pressed it to the signature line, and signed without hesitation. The paper whispered beneath the stroke of ink. One move, quiet and decisive. Elise thought she had exiled me. She had only triggered the opening act. Samuel adjusted his glasses, tapping the header again. "The house was never hers to claim. It belongs to the Northlake Trust, established years before your marriage. She filed as if it were marital property, an amateur's move." I let the words settle, the weight of iron law heavier than any argument Elise might stage. My father's foresight had built these walls. My discipline had kept them intact. She thought she was stripping me bare. In reality, she was standing in quicksand. Samuel slid another folder forward. Employment records. Derek Vaughn's name stamped across the top. "And him?" I asked. "Technically, he works for you," Samuel replied. "Termination can be processed at once. Misconduct, negligence. I'll draft it so the notice hits the same day as hers." I closed the file slowly, feeling the burn of whiskey still on my tongue, though I hadn't touched the glass. Elise believed she'd claimed my future. She hadn't even touched my past. Samuel laid the final document before me, the complaint drafted in crisp black type. At the top, my name stood not as husband, but as trustee and beneficiary. The defendant line bore hers, Elise Whitaker. I read each paragraph, slow and deliberate. Fraudulent claim. Attempted seizure of trust property. Damages sought. It wasn't anger fueling me. It was precision. The law didn't need fury. It needed facts. And I had them in abundance. Samuel placed the pen in my hand. The weight felt heavier than steel. I pressed it to paper, signed my name, and let the ink cut a clean line across her illusion. When the page lifted, I knew there was no undoing it. Elise thought she'd rewritten our story with divorce papers and 2 suitcases. But this was the real draft, the one that would stand in court. I slid the signed sheet back across the desk. "File it," I said. My voice carried no tremor, only finality. I closed the folder on Elise's case and turned to the second, Derek Vaughn's name printed in bold across the cover sheet. Employment contract, performance reviews, a trail of negligence long enough to bury him without ever mentioning her. Samuel's pen hovered. "Shall I prepare the termination?" "Yes," I said evenly. "Same day, same hour. When she opens her summons, he should be opening his pink slip." Samuel nodded, already making notes. "Grounds?" "Negligence, misconduct," I replied. "Make it airtight, no appeal, no loopholes. He'll walk out of that building with nothing but a cardboard box and the clothes on his back." I leaned back in my chair, staring past the tall windows to the lawn rolling green toward the gates. They thought they'd humiliated me, reduced me to nothing. But I wasn't the one losing a home. I wasn't the one losing a career. Their downfall would arrive on the same clock chime. Samuel snapped his briefcase shut, the sound sharp in the stillness. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses. "How do you want it handled?" I rose, walked to the tall windows, and let my reflection overlap with the stretch of lawn outside. My voice came steady, clipped. "Serve them together, same hour." Samuel's brow lifted, but he didn't question. He knew timing was everything. Elise would open her door to a summons while Derek was called into HR to face termination. 2 blows delivered in unison, leaving no room for them to lean on each other. I turned back, meeting his eyes. She'll know the house was never hers. He'll know the job was never his. And they'll both learn, at the same time, that I was never the man they thought I was. Samuel nodded once, locking the plan into motion. The gavel hadn't struck yet, but the verdict was already written. The study was quiet except for the faint tick of the mantel clock. I poured 2 fingers of whiskey, the amber catching the lamplight before sliding smooth into the glass. I raised it slowly, letting the burn rest on my tongue, my eyes fixed on the dark window pane. Out there, Elise and Derek were celebrating their illusion, her new home, his new status. They laughed, certain they'd stepped into a future that belonged to them. I set the glass down with care, the ring of crystal against wood sharp in the silence. "They think I'm ordinary," I said to no one, my reflection staring back, hard and steady. "They think I'm just another man with a paycheck. But every inch of this estate, every asset buried in the trust, every signature Samuel carried, they all said otherwise." I drank again, slower this time. The whiskey burned, but not as much as their mistake would. The clock ticked on. 7 days left. 7 days later, the clock struck noon. I knew because Samuel had timed it down to the minute. I wasn't there, but I could see it in my mind as clearly as if I'd stood on the porch myself. The courier's shoes clicked against Elise's stone steps, each stride measured, professional. A crisp white envelope rested in his hand, heavy with seals and signatures. She opened the door with a careless smile, robe tied loose, as though she were greeting a package instead of judgment. She signed without looking, flicked her wrist, and shut the door behind her. Inside, she tore the flap open as she crossed the hallway. Her eyes caught the first line, then slowed. Words like fraudulent claim and trust property dragged the color from her face. The smile died. Her knees wavered. Papers slid from her grip, scattering across the marble like fallen leaves. And in that moment, everything she thought she owned told her the truth. None of it was hers. I imagined her fingers trembling as she gathered the pages, eyes darting over each line as though reading them faster might change the truth. Fraud by misrepresentation. Damages pending. Trust property immune from marital claim. The language was clinical, merciless. Her breath must have quickened, her pulse pounding in her temples. Then the sound I'd been waiting for, a scream tearing out of her chest, raw and jagged. She crumpled one page, then ripped another clean down the middle, as if shredding the paper could undo the ink. But law doesn't bend for tantrums. It only breaks those who overreach. I pictured her robe slipping off her shoulder, face drained of color, hands clutching useless scraps against her chest, neighbors peeking from behind curtains, hearing the echo of her fury spilling out into the street. She thought she'd humiliated me by packing suitcases. Now she was the spectacle, unraveling in broad daylight, and the summons was only the beginning. Her scream carried farther than she realized. It tore through the marble hall, climbed the staircase, and bled out the open windows. Outside, it spilled onto the sidewalk, sharp enough to freeze neighbors mid-step. Curtains shifted. A lawnmower fell silent. The quiet rhythm of the street broke under her voice. I pictured her collapsed against the wall, clutching torn pages like they were a lifeline. Her world, our world, reduced to shredded paper at her feet. The robe pooled around her as if the house itself had stripped her bare. That scream wasn't grief. It was realization. The truth had finally cut through the illusions she'd wrapped herself in. She hadn't married into security. She'd married into a fortress she couldn't touch. The neighbors whispered, their voices carrying just enough for her to hear. Reputation bleeds faster than money ever does. And this was only half the blow. Across town, Derek's reckoning was already walking toward him. At the same hour, Elise's scream rattled the neighborhood. Derek Vaughn was striding through glass hallways, cufflinks in hand, his smile smug as ever. He thought he was climbing. In truth, he was being summoned. Report to HR at 10 a.m., the message had read. He walked in casual, chin high, convinced it was routine. Inside, two managers waited across a polished table. Between them sat a single envelope. "Mr. Vaughn," one of them said evenly, "your employment has been terminated, effective immediately." I imagined the way his grin faltered, the pause before disbelief set in. He snatched the letter, eyes racing, breath catching as the words blurred. Misconduct, negligence, access revoked. Security was already waiting in the hall. His badge would flash red before he even reached the side door. Derek thought he'd taken my place in life. Instead, he was walking out under escort, stripped of everything but shame. I could see it in my mind as if I were standing there. Derek's steps quickened down the corridor, the letter clenched in his fist, sweat beginning to bead at his temple. He reached the side door, swiped his badge with the same swagger he'd worn onto my porch. The reader blinked once, then flashed red. Access denied. He swiped again, harder this time, jaw tight. Another red flash. The hallway felt longer now, colder. Screens froze, conversations hushed. Colleagues turned in their chairs to watch the spectacle unfold. Two security officers appeared, silent but immovable, one on each side. Derek muttered under his breath, half curse, half plea, but the glass doors opened only for them. He was guided out past the same people he once tried to impress. Every step stripped him further, until all he carried was a termination letter and the echo of a life he thought he'd stolen. And that echo would follow him home. The final act of his downfall played out in full view. Derek's chair scraped hard against the floor when he stood, but it didn't matter. Security was already at his elbows. They didn't shove, didn't speak, just guided him with steady hands toward the glass lobby. Each step was a march through judgment. Screens flickered as coworkers pretended to work, eyes following him in silence. Some leaned back in their chairs, others whispered just loud enough for him to hear. The smug grin he once wore around my dinner table was gone, replaced by a tight jaw and eyes darting for an escape that didn't exist. The revolving doors spit him out onto the street. No badge, no office, no status, just a man clutching an envelope that spelled his end. He thought he'd stolen my life. Instead, he was escorted out like a trespasser, the sound of the doors sealing behind him louder than any insult I could deliver. The courthouse doors swung wide, and the noise hit me first, reporters crowding the steps, cameras clicking like a hive of bees. Inside, the chamber was packed to the rafters. Neighbors, colleagues, strangers with curious eyes, they all came to witness the spectacle Elise and Derek had written for themselves. I walked in behind Samuel Grant, no briefcase in my hand, no stack of papers, only calm. The crowd hushed as we passed, whispers rippling through the benches. I caught fragments. That's him. The husband. The trust. Elise was already at the defense table, dressed in navy, chin high, as though posture could erase panic. Derek sat beside her, eyes sunken, cufflinks missing, his hand clenched around hers like a lifeline. The bailiff's voice thundered, "All rise!" Robes swept in as the judge entered, glasses low on his nose, gaze sharp enough to cut. The case was called. The air grew heavy. Their stage was set, but the script was mine. The double doors opened, and heads turned as Elise swept in, navy suit tailored to perfection, heels clicking sharp against the marble floor. She carried herself like dignity alone could shield her from the truth written in black ink. Her chin was high, her eyes scanning the benches, daring anyone to see the fracture beneath her mask. Derek followed a step behind, shoulders hunched, his stride missing the confidence he once flaunted on my porch. His tie was crooked, his jaw tight, eyes sunken from nights spent staring at walls that didn't belong to him. They slid into their seats at the defense table, fingers lacing together in a nervous grip. Elise squeezed his hand too hard, as if holding him could anchor her, but the way he winced told the room all it needed to know. Neither of them were steady anymore. Across the aisle, I sat motionless, watching. The crowd didn't see a broken man. They saw the one who had prepared. "All rise," the bailiff's voice boomed, echoing off the paneled walls. Chairs scraped back, a rustle of fabric filled the chamber. I stepped through the doors behind Samuel Grant, my lawyer, each stride deliberate, each breath steady. I wore no expression worth reading, just calm. A charcoal suit, pressed sharp, no folder in my hand, no stack of frantic notes. To anyone watching, I looked like a man attending his own routine meeting. But that calm was the sharpest weapon in the room. Gasps rippled as I passed the benches. That's him, the husband, the trust. Whispers darted between reporters scribbling in their pads. Elise's eyes flicked up, locking on me for a fraction of a second. Her smile faltered. Derek shifted in his chair, jaw tightening. Their hands gripped tighter beneath the table, white-knuckled. I reached my seat without breaking stride, buttoned my jacket, and sat. Not a word spoken, but the silence spoke louder than they ever could. The judge settled in, glasses low on his nose, gavel poised but still. Case number 2147, North Lake Trust versus Elise Whitaker. The words rang out like iron. Samuel Grant rose smoothly, buttoning his jacket, his voice carrying with the weight of certainty. Your Honor, the plaintiff seeks relief against fraudulent claims filed by the defendant. Mrs. Whitaker attempted to seize property belonging to the North Lake Trust, a trust established years before this marriage. The evidence will show her petition is not only baseless, but malicious. He placed a thick folder on the table, the seal of the trust stamped on every page. The room stirred, whispers rising and falling like a tide. Across the aisle, Elise's jaw tightened, her lips pressed into a thin line. Derek stared at the table, avoiding the gaze of the gallery. I sat motionless, hands folded, eyes forward. Every fact Samuel spoke was another nail in the coffin Elise had built for herself. The defense lawyer rose, smoothing his tie as though presentation could make up for substance. His tone dripped with practiced sympathy. Your Honor, my client is not a fraudster. She is a wife, a woman misled by a man who concealed his true station in life. She believed she lived in a marital home built from shared income. She believed her husband was an ordinary employee. If anyone was deceived, it is Mrs. Whitaker. The words echoed across the chamber, polished, rehearsed. Elise dabbed at the corner of her eye with a tissue, chin trembling just enough for the gallery to notice. A few heads tilted, sympathetic. But I knew the truth, and Samuel had the documents to prove it. I didn't flinch. I didn't shake my head. I sat in silence, steady as stone, letting the weight of their performance pile higher. The higher it climbed, the harder it would crash. The judge scribbled a note, eyes narrowing. The real trial was only beginning. The judge lifted his gaze, tapping the gavel once. The sound cut through the murmurs like a blade. Enough posturing. We will hear testimony. Mr. Pierce, take the stand. All eyes followed as I rose. My steps were steady, each one echoing across the polished floorboards. The bailiff guided me to the witness box, the Bible already waiting. Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth? The clerk asked. I do, I answered, my voice calm, firm. I sat, posture straight, hands folded neatly on my lap. From across the room, I felt Elise's stare burning against me, her tissue trembling in her hand. Derek leaned back in his chair, jaw tight, as if bracing for a blow. The judge nodded toward Samuel. "Proceed." And in that moment, the room leaned in, waiting. Not for theatrics, not for anger, just for the truth. And the truth was heavier than anything they were prepared to carry. Samuel stepped closer, legal pad in hand, voice crisp. "Mr. Pierce, please state your role in relation to the North Lake Trust." I let the silence settle for a beat, the entire courtroom leaning forward. Then I spoke, clear and steady. "I am its trustee and beneficiary. The trust was established before my marriage to Mrs. Whitaker. Every property, including the home in question, is protected under that structure. It was never marital property." Whispers broke out along the benches, reporters scribbling furiously. Elise's face drained of color, her lips parting as if she could swallow the words back into me. Derek shifted, eyes fixed on the floor, his hand slipping out of hers. Samuel nodded, satisfied. "So this court understands there was never any concealment of ownership?" "Correct," I said. "Only an assumption on her part, that what she touched was hers to claim." The judge adjusted his glasses, gaze sharpening. The weight of the trust now filled the room. Samuel adjusted his stance, eyes steady on me. "Mr. Pierce, if you are the trustee and beneficiary, why live as though you were just another employee?" I drew in a slow breath, letting my words land where they needed to. "Because I watched my father lose everything. He trusted too easily, let managers and friends run his empire while he stood back, one mistake after another until nothing remained. I swore I would never repeat it." I paused, the memory sharp even now, the auctions, the empty rooms, the look in my father's eyes when the legacy slipped away. "So I walked the floors of my own company as an employee. No one saw me as the man signing their checks. They saw me as ordinary. That gave me clarity. It gave me truth." The room shifted. Gasps, whispers, pens scratching harder. Across the aisle, Elise's knuckles whitened, clutching the tissue as though it could hold her world together. Truth had just stripped her mask. Her lawyer shot up from his chair, voice sharp. "Mr. Pierce, isn't it true you deceived your wife? That you let her believe she was married to a man with nothing?" The question hung heavy in the chamber. Reporters leaned closer, pens poised. Elise straightened in her seat, waiting for me to falter. I met the lawyer's stare, calm as stone. "No," I said evenly. "I gave her a home. I gave her loyalty. What she chose to do with it revealed more about her than about me." He pressed harder, his tone rising. "So you admit you misled her?" I didn't blink. "I tested her," I replied, my voice low but clear enough for every corner of the room. "And she failed." Gasps rippled through the benches. Elise flinched, the tissue slipping from her fingers. Derek shifted uncomfortably, jaw tightening. The lawyer faltered, words caught in his throat. And for the first time, Elise had no script left to play. The judge's voice cut through the murmurs. "Mrs. Whitaker, please take the stand." Elise rose slowly, smoothing the navy fabric of her suit as though neat lines could hold her together. She walked to the witness box, heels clicking sharp but uneven, her hand trembling slightly as she placed it on the Bible. "Do you swear to tell the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth?" the clerk asked. "I do," she whispered, her voice catching. She sat, spine straight, but her eyes shimmered. A single tear slid down her cheek before she brushed it away, quick, almost defiant. The gallery leaned in, some softening at the sight, others exchanging knowing glances. Her lawyer stepped closer, tone gentle. "Mrs. Whitaker, tell the court why you believe the house was yours." Her lips parted, voice trembling. "I lived there. I made it a home. I thought it was built from his income during our marriage." The tissue returned to her hand, but the mask was cracking fast. Samuel rose, buttoning his jacket, voice firm. "Mrs. Whitaker, isn't it true that before filing this petition, you told Mr. Pierce he was worthless without a job?" Elise froze, eyes flicking toward the gallery. Her throat bobbed once. I I was angry, she murmured. Samuel's tone sharpened. Answer the question. Did you mock your husband for losing his job? Her shoulders slumped. Yes. He stepped closer, papers in hand. And isn't it also true that during your marriage you entered into a relationship with his closest friend, Mr. Derek Vaughn? Gasps rippled through the chamber. Derek stiffened at the defense table, his jaw locking tight. Elise's eyes darted to him, desperate, searching for rescue. None came. Her voice cracked, barely audible. Yes. The room erupted in whispers. The judge struck his gavel once, hard. Order returned, but the damage was done. Elise's tears couldn't erase the truth now hanging heavy in the air. The judge leaned forward, spectacles low on his nose, gavel resting against the bench. His voice carried the weight of finality. This court has heard enough. The defendant's petition is void. The Northlake Trust remains intact. All claims to the property are hereby dismissed. The words cracked through the chamber like thunder. Elise gasped, a hand flying to her mouth. Derek dropped his gaze to the floor, shoulders collapsing inward. The judge continued, his tone even colder. Furthermore, Mrs. Whitaker is liable for damages and costs incurred by this fraudulent filing. Payment is to be rendered according to statute. Whispers surged across the gallery, reporters scribbling, neighbors leaning in, the sound of pens racing faster than Elise's pulse. She sagged in the witness chair, face pale, eyes glassy. The gavel struck once, sharp as a gunshot. Court adjourned. I stood without hurry, buttoned my jacket, and walked toward the doors. Behind me, the sound of her world caving in echoed louder than any scream. The gavel's echo hadn't even faded when Elise broke. Her scream ripped through the chamber, raw and guttural, shattering whatever poise she had tried to maintain. She slammed her palms against the witness stand, tears streaking down her face as her voice cracked. No, this isn't fair. That house was mine. I lived there. I built it into a home. Her words collapsed into sobs, jagged and uncontrolled. Reporters leaned forward, pens flying, microphones catching every syllable. The judge struck the gavel again, harder this time. Order! But Elise couldn't stop. Her wails ricocheted against the marble walls, her tissue shredded in her hand. Neighbors in the gallery whispered, heads shaking, some with pity, others with satisfaction. Beside her, Derek stared at the floor, face burning, jaw clenched. He didn't reach for her hand. He didn't even move. Her dignity was gone. All that remained was noise, echoing in a room built for truth. The gavel struck one final time and I rose. No rush, no flourish, just a steady movement. I slid the chair back, buttoned my jacket with deliberate calm, and walked toward the doors. The weight of the room clung behind me. Her sobs, the whispers, Derek's silence, but none of it touched me. When the heavy doors swung open, sunlight poured in, blinding at first, then warm against my face. I descended the courthouse steps slowly, each stride echoing against the stone, the sound crisp and final. Reporters swarmed the edges, cameras flashing, but I didn't break stride, didn't answer a single shouted question. All I felt was the sun on my shoulders, the air cleaner than it had been in months. Behind me, Elise was unraveling. Beside her, Derek was shrinking. And around me, the world watched a man who hadn't lost a thing. I reached the last step and paused, letting the sun claim me. The trial was over. Their reckoning had only begun. By the time I reached the street, the whispers had already spread faster than the headlines. Neighbors who had once waved politely from their porches leaned closer to one another, voices low but sharp. She lost everything, one murmured. House wasn't even hers, another replied, shaking his head. And the affair, right out in the open, with his best friend? Curtains twitched, camera phones lifted, gossip running hotter than the Texas sun. Every word drifted back toward the courthouse doors where Elise would eventually emerge, not as the woman who won, but as the woman who gambled and lost. I didn't need to correct them. The facts were louder than any story I could tell. My silence let the truth carry itself, neighbor to neighbor, street to street, until it became the only narrative left. Elise thought betrayal would crown her. Instead, it had crowned her in shame. I adjusted my cuffs and kept walking. The verdict was already living in their mouths. Derek came out a few minutes later, flanked by 2 security officers more out of habit than necessity. His suit, once sharp, looked wrinkled in the daylight. The badge that used to grant him access to everything now meant nothing. HR's notice had already spread. He was unemployed before he even stepped onto the sidewalk. Old friends who once toasted glasses with him at rooftop bars crossed the street rather than offer a handshake. His phone buzzed, then went silent. One group chat after another cutting ties. The man who thrived on connections now had none. He kept his head down, hands jammed into his pockets, avoiding every lens, every whisper. Even those who once admired him muttered now, "That's the guy? With his friend's wife?" I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Consequences were doing their job, clean and quiet. Derek's empire wasn't collapsing with noise. It was dissolving in silence. And silence can be the loudest punishment of all. When Elise finally emerged, the sun was unforgiving. Reporters surged forward, microphones thrust inches from her face, cameras flashing so fast the steps lit like a storm. She raised a trembling hand to shield her eyes, but it couldn't hide the cracks. Her attorney had already slipped away. Derek lingered at the curb, but made no move toward her. She stood alone, drowning in the crowd's appetite. The whispers were harsher now, louder. She's broke. Lost the house. Cheated on her husband and got nothing. She tried to walk, but the heels that once carried her so proudly wobbled against the concrete. Each flash seemed to strip another layer of her dignity until there was nothing left but a shell in navy fabric. Money gone. Status gone. Respect gone. I didn't move closer. I didn't need to. Her fall was no longer my responsibility. It was hers, and everyone could see it written in daylight. Back inside, the courthouse halls had quieted, the echo of footsteps replacing the chaos of cameras. Samuel walked beside me, a folder tucked under his arm, his stride steady. "It's done," he said simply. "The court clerk has recorded costs against Mrs. Whitaker. Garnishment orders will follow. Whatever she earns, or pretends to earn, will now flow first to cover the damages." He handed me a copy, embossed with the seal. Numbers lined the page, cold and final. Elise had wanted ownership. What she had earned was debt. I studied the document for only a moment before sliding it back into the folder. "Thank you," I told him. "No need for celebration, just acknowledgement." Samuel gave a short nod. They thought this was a game of sympathy. Courts don't deal in sympathy. They deal in paper. He was right. Receipts, not rage, had closed the door. And with the paperwork filed, the last thread of Elise's claim had been cut clean. On the drive back, the road curved past the house that had once carried her laughter. The shutters still stood straight, the lawn trimmed neatly by a service I had long since paid for. From the street, it looked unchanged, like a picture frame that refuses to admit the photo inside has already faded. I slowed only for the stop sign at the corner, eyes lingering for a breath. Curtains twitched. Maybe hers, maybe just another neighbor curious to see if I would pause. I didn't. My hand stayed firm on the wheel, my foot steady on the gas. That house no longer carried weight. It was a shell, stripped of meaning the moment she chose betrayal over belonging. The temptation to glance in the rear view came and went, but I didn't indulge it. I kept my eyes forward. Some doors close with slams. Others, like this one, close with the quiet hum of an engine pulling away. By the time I reached North Lake Estate, the sun was sinking low, bleeding gold across the ridge line. The wrought iron gates opened with their usual hum, steady and deliberate, as if nothing in the world beyond them had shifted. Inside, silence greeted me, not the heavy silence of an empty room, but the calm silence of a place untouched by scandal. The gravel crunched beneath my tires, and when I stepped out, the air carried only cedar and the faint trace of honeysuckle drifting from the tree line. The house stood dignified in the glow, its windows catching the last of the light. No reporters here, no whispers, no lies, just stone, wood, and history. I loosened my tie, exhaling the day, and for the first time in months, my chest felt lighter. This was the life I had chosen to protect, and it had endured. The world beyond the gates could burn and gossip. Here, the quiet was mine. In the study, the last rays of dusk stretched long across the oak desk. I poured a small measure of bourbon, the amber liquid catching the fading light, then set the glass aside. My hand drifted to the ring finger that had carried weight long after its meaning was gone. I slid the band free, cool metal against warm skin. For a moment I turned it between my fingers, letting memory flicker, vows once whispered, laughter once shared. Then I reached for the heavy manila envelope marked in my own hand. Closed files. The flap opened with a soft rustle. Inside lay receipts, notes, and fragments of a story now finished. I dropped the ring in, the sound a faint metallic click that landed like punctuation at the end of a long sentence. I sealed it shut, pressed it flat, and slid it into the drawer. Some chapters end with fire. Mine ended with paper and silence. I lifted the bourbon, letting the glass catch the lamplight. The silence of the study pressed in, not heavy, not empty, just clean. Outside, crickets had begun their chorus, steady and unbothered. In my mind, the words rose uninvited, but true. Justice doesn't need noise. It doesn't need shouting matches in kitchens or slammed doors at midnight. It doesn't need vengeance carved into skin or spectacle played out for neighbors. Justice is quieter than that. It lives in documents signed, in truths recorded, in courts that turn paper into verdicts. I sipped slow, the warmth settling deep. Elise's screams, Derek's shame, the gossip outside. They belonged to the world of noise. My world had no room for it anymore. Receipts, not rage. Order, not chaos. Justice doesn't raise its voice. It doesn't need to. When the dust clears, it simply remains. Calm, undeniable, final. And in that calm, I found freedom. Morning light spilled through the tall windows of Northlake, washing the study in gold. I set aside the empty glass from the night before and opened a fresh folder marked Northlake Housing Fund. This wasn't about Elise anymore, not Derek, not even the trial. This was about what came next. I'd watched my father lose everything because he trusted the wrong people. I refused to repeat that mistake. The trust had preserved my family's legacy. Now it could serve something larger. Affordable homes for working families, low-interest loans for first-time buyers, a fund run lean, audited tight, no loopholes for opportunists. I wrote the first draft of the charter, each line anchored in lessons bought with scars. While Elise counted losses and Derek chased shadows, I chose a different ledger, one that recorded dignity, not betrayal. Northlake wouldn't just stand as a shield, it would become a foundation, and this time, the walls would hold. I stood on the terrace of Northlake as the sun folded into the horizon, the lawn stretching quiet beneath the oaks. The house behind me was silent, but not empty. It carried the weight of truth. People think betrayal leaves you broken. It doesn't. It just strips away illusions. Elise thought she won a house, a man, a future. Derek thought he'd stepped into my shoes. What they never saw was the ground they walked on was mine all along, guarded by trust, sealed by law. I didn't shout. I didn't beg. I documented. I prepared. And when the moment came, the facts did the shouting for me. Receipts, not rage. I lost nothing. She lost everything. And I rebuilt, not with hatred, but with truth. Now I ask you, if it were you, would you forgive or let justice speak? Comment below. Your choice might steady someone else's hands.